My great privilege. We're really, was just so happy that Mark agreed to be our kickoff speaker here tonight. And the whales never had a better friend than Mark, and neither has the whale trail.
Goodbye.
I don't know what to say after all that. So I'm just a local boy too that got involved in this back in '76. And what was happening then was, at that time they were still capturing whales out of Puget Sound for use in aquariums. And finally they drove them down into Bud Inlet, threw a big net around them, made a big scene. They made a big mistake there because Bud Inlet's like a fishbowl. Too many people saw what they were doing, and people went, "Hey, wait a minute, what are you doing taking our whales out of the water?" And actually that was '76, not that long ago. And so the scientific community finally said, before we take any more, why don't we figure out how many we have to start with? Because we really didn't know. So I think that was right at the beginning of toll-free numbers, 1-800 something. Remember that, before toll-free numbers? Anyway, they said, call this number if you see whales. So I said, I can do that. I've been seeing whales all my life going right by where I live. So that's kind of how I got into it. And then after a few years of doing that, calling in every time I saw them, they'd be calling me and they'd say, "Say, we got some whales coming your way. Could you let us know how many there are and if you can identify any of them?" So I got an ID chart, and sure as shooting, some of them were identifiable by their fins and how they traveled with the group, and so that's really how I got. So it really was a rock bottom situation I got involved with. How I got involved with these animals, and it's just gone from there. Okay, you can go on to the next one. Oh, is that as washed out as it looks? I guess it is. But there's your three icons: the killer whale, the ferry boat, and Mount Rainier. And of course the HOMA background there, the industry that goes along with it. Before I get too far along with killer whales, I want to talk about some of the other things we see right around this area. The Dall's porpoise have been very common. They came in about the mid-'70s, and recent years their population has gone down. Whether they've moved out, probably have moved out and then found other areas. Okay, you can go ahead. This forward and back. Okay. I can handle that, I think. I'm not a big tech guy, but this is all these shots are right off West Seattle. No Photoshop here. This is all the real deal. This is a little guy, real nondescript harbor porpoise, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about him a little bit later, because what's happened. I must have hit the wrong.
No.
Oh, okay.
For some reason, it's an advertisement for somebody.
Okay. For some reason, in the last few years, like the last 5 or 6 years, the Dall's porpoise have moved out and the harbor porpoise have moved in. Big shift. Matter of fact, last Thursday night I was standing out on the point talking to a friend, and a group of 3 went by. Another group of 3 went by, and another group of 6 went by, all within about a half an hour. So that was like a dozen animals, all moving on the rip line, moving off the point. I know I wasn't seeing the same ones because they were all going like a parade.
North or south?
They're going south at that time, yeah. So there's been a big increase in harbor porpoise just in the last few years. I'm going to talk about them a little bit later. Now, not too many years ago, we had these weirdos that were hybrids. They were a cross. It's really unusual to have porpoise of 2 different species successfully breeding, but that was a hybrid. Nobody really knows too much about what was going on with that, and I haven't seen any lately just because the Dalls have, it seems to have moved out. And then in '92 we had a false killer whale come in. They're generally a pelagic animal, and he ran around in here for about a month. And he loved boats. He was charging the Weedle Foss here one day. He charged, continually breaching right up to the boat. And ferry boats, he hung around Vashon Dock quite a bit. And then he was up in Canada for a while, and I haven't heard about him for a while. Then of course we get the gray whales coming through. This guy came up right off of Coleman Pool, and this was the third breach. I finally got him on the third one. He was looking right at me. Bash on in the background. These are some of the identification on these. I take the shots and send them down to Cascadia Research, but all these spots, and this is what they call the dorsal hump. There's the points of his vertebra going down his back. He's of course heading this way to the left. But all these markings on it. Here's the shot of a whale, gray whale going the other way. Of course, you want to get port and starboard if you can, because both sides are different. They come in incredibly shallow sometimes. It's remarkable. This one was in 10 feet of water, so right down off Lincoln Park, and he's got a, I called him Circleback, because he had a dinner plate size white spot right square in the back of his, and I could recognize him. He was going back and forth. Not only did he have a circle on his back, but he would go up the alpine and then come back down and go up. So he was in real shallow.
What time of year is that? Any idea?
It's in the spring.
Spring.
Yeah, and it was one of those years when we had a lot of them come in, and some of them died because they didn't get enough to eat the previous summer. And here's the one we've been talking about tonight, the one that came ashore down off of Royal Beach. Pretty remarkable to see a great big animal like that. He's real emaciated. You can see the. Generally, they'd be real robust and
What species?
fat. This is a gray. Baleen well.
Can you use the pointer mark and show us where the emaciation is?
Well, along the back here, you can see the bones. Generally, you wouldn't see that when they're laying on the beach. You'd see a nice rounded, rounded animal. His belly was full of garbage and he had starved to death. A lot of when they come in fresh like that, the barnacles are still trying to eat, and these little parasitic crabs are crawling around. So they asked me to pull him off the beach at high tide and tether him to a buoy, so they could tow him away. And actually, they towed him down to McNeil Island, let him decompose on the beach, and then reassembled the skeleton, and it's down at the Highline College hanging up. It's really cool if anybody. So the skeleton went to good use. But a funny story, NOAA Fisheries asked me to do this, and they brought me the rope and the buoys, and I said, sure, I can do that. I towed a gray whale off, and the problem was it was 24 hours, about 24 hours after it had died, and it hadn't become buoyant yet, and because it takes a while for the gases to build up before it floats like that, so it's free floating. And the beach down at Royals is real flat and sandy, and then it drops right off. And so we were pulling and pulling and pulling on that thing across the sand, and 40 horse motor, about all I could do to get that thing dragged across the sand. And when it hit the drop off, it sank. It was tied to my boat. So I said, Maya, get them. My daughter's my assistant a lot of times. I said, Maya, get the knife. All these thoughts were going through my head like, God, NOAA Fisheries entrusted me with this job. And all this went through my head. And then after she handed me the knife, I said, get the hook. And there was a buoy not too far off the bow, so she got the buoy, and I was able to get the rope through. It wasn't as if it sunk like a rock, but it definitely disappeared from sight. But anyway, the next morning it was buoyant. Learned a lesson there. And then every once in a while we get a humpback. This Dalco Pass seems to be a place where humpbacks tend to. This guy hung out for about a month down there, and there was one down there just a few weeks ago. Dalco Pass is right at the south end of Vashon, and it's a confluence of 3 different waterways coming together, and there's a lot of herring and feed there, and I think that's what these guys are after. But they wander through once in a while. We see them on a regular basis, and I try and get a shot of their dorsal fin that's a real variable on these guys, and then the markings again on the side are different. So Count Boukidis again down at Cascadia Research does the work on those guys. There's underside of the flukes can be good too, but the light wasn't real good that day. But this is right off Alki Light. There was one moving north, and I happened to get a good shot of him, and then he flat out disappeared. I don't know where he went. So. And then our friends, our good friends, the killer whales, the orcas. This is J27. He was born in 1991. And he's a full adult bull now. This was just October he was moving through here. There's a real unique mark right there that's very identifiable. And this is just a shot out off of Cape Lava, back when I was a younger guy. And killer whales carved, and petroglyph carved into the rock. There's one here and one here, and some faces here. So killer whales have fascinated people for a long, long time. This was K40 Raggedy. She had a real ragged head. She's no longer with us. She was one of the elder females. She died here last year or two. I can't remember now when she was gone. But she was one of the real identifiable flagships of Cape Cod. These are Cape Cod animals as well, and this is just how we do our identification work. Not only do we take the shots, but visually you can see that this mark down here is much different than this mark and this one. So the saddle patches from side to side are all different, plus the shape of the fin in a lot of cases is a little different. But we try and photo identify every animal in the pod when they come through, so because it's hard when they're to say, oh, I saw this one, I saw that one, I saw that. When you got the photographs and you look at them at the end of the day, then you pretty much got the who's where when. And also just besides the shape of the fin, there's nicks in the fin, sometimes an indentation on the front, and scratches and scars.
How'd they get those nicks?
Oh, I'm not sure. Probably through bites, and because they do wrestle around, they're very tactile with each other. They're rolling around, and I've seen a lot of tooth rakes on them. It's amazing that they can, they have the potential to unleash lethal harm on each other, but they don't. They don't break the skin with each other. I'll get to the transients a little bit later. So these are our residential animals. This is the ID chart of the family tree. We have 3 pods, J's, K's, and L's, and they just identify the different groups by letter, and then each animal in the group by number. And then they lay them out according to their matriarchal history. Let's see, let me take this one. So this would be the mother, this would be her offspring, and then this would be this one's offspring, making this one the grandmother. Some of them have more than, there's a great-grandmother in some of these, and then some of the daughters have more than one. So it's all laid out according to their family tree. And then, of course, these squares are tombstones or animals that were alive and are no longer alive, and with their born and died years on them. So the whole entire history of the community is there, back to about 76. Some of them we don't know how old they are, because they were adults when the study began in 76. real long-lived animals like elephants stay with their mother, matriarchal, stay with their mother through their entire lives.
Are the pods all family related, or are they, it looked like some of those branches didn't connect, so are they, do some pods stay together and they're not related? Or some members?
No, all these animals are in each pod are closely related. I mean, if you go farther up the tree, you'd see that you know, this family had a grandmother in common, or they're just doing biopsies on them to figure out who the paternal order is, and they're finding that two of the big bulls in the southern resident community have done are responsible for most of the calves. So there is kind of an alpha bull thing that it's preliminary, but through genetics they found that there is kind of an alpha bull thing. And one of them, unfortunately, was J1, and he just died. So one of the great bulls is gone. So in a group like this, I can't tell you exactly who this is, but I put the picture in just for an example. This would be probably a mother and her kids, or perhaps with a group this big, two mothers and their kids, and the mothers are likely sisters. Or, you know, so they run around in these groups. It's not always like that, because the whole pod does intermingle and get together, and the kids get together. But the calf stays with its mother, pretty close to its mother all its life. This is J37, and there's Coleman Pool right over there. This was her first trip too. They'd seen her, I think, the day before up in San Juan's. And you can see she has the peachy color. That's the sign of a new calf. The white markings are kind of a peach color like that.
So how old is she?
Well, they saw her first either the day or the day before. She was fairly new, but maybe I don't know how long it had been since we'd seen the group. So, but it's within 3 years old, still right by mom a lot of the time. And J10 and her son J18, he was about 18 at that time. His fin is sprouting. He's a teenager, and he's still right close to mom, right down on Fauntleroy there. And then the two old timers, J2, now they've been saying she was 80 years old since I've been doing this. So I'll just say she's old. And she was one of those ones that was an adult with kids before the study began, so they really don't know how old she is. They just extrapolate through the numbers. And he was about 50, well into his 50s at this time. And she's old, and the son is still right by mom. That's the point I'm trying to make. Right down there off Lincoln Park. There's behavioral patterns that we note when they're coming through, and most of what whales are doing is a function of food. They're searching for food. They're great big animals. They need a lot of food to sustain them. So foraging is a big one when they come in here. They have purpose. And traveling, resting, they do all get together and rest. And a lot of these things, the playing, the socializing, and a lot of times they're doing that when they're traveling. A lot of these patterns, it's like everybody's doing it. It's like, we're foraging now, okay, we're going to rest now. Everybody come together, we're going to rest now. It's very organized, you know. Every once in a while, one of the little kids will run off, but it's all kind of a coordinated family effort. This is Ken Balcom's famous shot of a salmon in the mouth. And our southern residents are salmon orcas. There's no doubt about it. That's why they're here. We're orcas that feed on salmon. This is a little guy, K-34. I was shooting. This is taken off a DV film, but he's got a big chum in his mouth there. Played with that thing for about 10 minutes.
Wow.
And flipping it around, and never did kill it that I saw. I'm sure they did eventually, but I never saw anything of it. So. And the story of the salmon, you know, is the story of the killer whales. I'm a salmon fisherman, and I happen to be up in Canada, about 500 miles up the stem of the Fraser, and this great big king was laying on the side of the river and after it had spawned. You know, the story of the salmon is just as amazing as the story of the orca, to me, anyway. Now, this doesn't look like much, but this is for me, this is a really good day. I can go out and get 8 samples in a day. I come in strutting around like a rooster going, man, I had a good day. But so what do we got? We got a mucus sample here, and we got fecal samples here, a bunch of fecal samples. Here's intestine and gills from a salmon. Got 6 scales in this bag. Got more fecal samples over here. Those are good days. A lot of times, if we get 1 sample, we're doing good. But 8 samples in a day is unheard of. But that's one of the things I'm doing. And they do work in the lab with all this stuff. Fecal sample, they do all kinds of, from genetics to hormone levels, pregnancy. 28 different tests they can do on fecal material. It's like a little treasure trove. And from the scales, they can analyze them and see what species of salmon it is and how old they were. And from the flesh samples, they can do DNA work and find out which river or hatchery, in some cases, that the salmon came from. With the idea being which salmon runs are important to them. This is all part of the Endangered Species Act and trying to develop a recovery plan. And part of developing a recovery plan is knowing what is important to them, which salmon is, or which species are important to them. No Photoshop here. This is the real deal. There's old J1. He was one of my good buddies, but he's gone now. In his late 50s, which is very old for a orca bull.
So Mark, you must not be able to find all the dead ones, so at what point do you determine one died?
They disappear. Very seldom do we find them. Very seldom. And usually by the time they're found, they're not in good enough shape to do much with them. They don't have a lot of the fat layer is relatively thin, so most of the time they sink when they die, I guess. They just don't wash ashore like other whales.
But my question is, at what point do you give up and determine that they're dead?
Well, Center for Whale Research kind of runs that part of the show. I think it's multiple sightings of the pod and giving it, what, 2-3 months, or I'm not exactly sure how long but they have these protocols that they more or less come up with. And, but if it isn't with the pod, it's pretty much gone. With the rare exception of one I'm going to show you here. Yeah. These are just some of the behavioral things you'll see. Breaching, tail flips over up Lake Island, pectoral fins slapping. They bring it up and they slap it on the water. It sounds like a gunshot sometimes. They get the acoustics just right on it. Spy hopping, and J1 having a look. And just playing and socializing. Pushing, one of them there is pushing the little one up. Plowing it around. This is what we call kelping. It's got a piece of kelp wrapped around its fin and just dragging it along. Very tactile, sensitive to the touch. And this is my sense of humor shot. one day I was drifting down on Point Robinson, and she went down and under the boat, came up, and blew right back into my camera lens and into my face and got me good. Had to be on purpose. Had to have been on purpose. And this is little Springer. Of course, she showed up over up Vashon Dock back in January of
2002.
2002, 11 years ago. Stayed for 6 months till she was captured and taken back to her family up in Canada.
Somebody knows.
Somebody's read the book. Good deal.
Why capture it and move it?
She was a northern resident. Every one of these communities has a range, and although our whales sometimes pass through, they're just transiting. They don't hang out in that area. They're like southern residents, it's about the middle of Vancouver Island and south, and northern residents, it's the north half of Vancouver Island and up into southeast Alaska sometimes even, but mostly Canada. So she was a northern resident. They speak completely different languages. They're completely different genetic base. And she was she was 2.5, 3 years old here. She'd somehow gotten wandered away. Her mother had died. You know, I don't know the story that well, but anyway, she came from a dysfunctional orca family and got lost and wandered completely out of her range. And she was hanging around these ferry boats, and there were people gawking at her, and she had all these problems, which I'll show you. She had a skin condition, whale pox. You can see her skin was all mottled and wasn't black, and she was very unhealthy. She had parasites. And so I was over there the first day she came, and a buddy of mine that works on the ferry said, "We got a little baby orca over here." And I said, "No, it can't possibly be. They don't run around by themselves. Do you see any other whales around or anything?" No. So next day we went over and learned it was a female. We got that far by the underparts there. Definitely a female. And again, you can see her skin condition here. Very unhealthy condition. This is Joe, founder in Seattle of the American Cetacean Society, and he's an acoustic expert. And I took him out one day so we could record her vocalizations, perhaps to get a vocalization signature from her, to try and learn which pod she might be from, because each pod has its own specific set of calls and language. And this was right after 9/11. And all these Homeland Security boats were running around out there. Joe's got cables and all this equipment on the deck, and he's wearing this thing on his head. I'm going, "Joe, you know, these guys might shoot first and ask questions later." We were right around the ferry boats, you know. Anyway, Joe, we didn't get much that day. She was relatively silent, and she was silent quite a bit because she didn't have anybody to talk to. She was underweight. You can see this area behind the blowhole was depressed. That's a sure sign behind the skull.
Mark, we have a question now.
Yes, sir.
Are you part of NOAA?
I am. I subcontract with them. I work for them. And one of the things we did was she was playing with driftwood and sticks, and you can see these gouges and slashes in her skin. She was so rough with them. She was really lacking the tactile touch of her fellow podmates. They're always rolling and rubbing and wrestling with each other. And that was one of the things we would use to engage her if there was a biologist that wanted to get a good close look at her. One day after she was done, I grabbed one of the sticks and I put a tether on it, and we put it out. She'd come right up and start playing with that darn thing. Starving for attention, starving for, you know, have a very young animal by itself like that was very unusual. And I wasn't part of the capture process, or the transfer process. I was only part of the monitoring her while she was in the wild out here and make sure she wasn't going to go into a rapid decline, which tends to happen sometimes with these animals if they're not healthy. And then I'm coming to it. Here she is. Oh, was this last summer, Donna, or
2011.
yeah, recent. She's running around with her group, and she's a full-grown animal at what, age 14 now. So everybody's expecting her to have her first calf here pretty soon. So a tremendous, success story to take an animal and move it back and have it be accepted by its family again. Was it a great aunt or some
It was the aunt.
some relation? Some relation of her family group took her in right away, and she's part of the group now.
They use a boat, or how do they transport?
Yeah, they used a real fast boat.
Donated catamaran.
Yeah, it was a real fast boat, and they iced her down, and it was a major project. And I wanted to talk about transient killer whales. Now, these are a whole different bunch. This is a much wilder bunch than our local residents. These are the marine mammal eaters. They don't eat the fish. They're much bigger animals. Physically, they're different. They're bigger to start with. Their fins are much sharper with a sharp tip at the top. And they don't have the, in the saddle patches, they don't have the darker markings, or the darker pigments are always clear. And they run in smaller groups. They run silent quite a bit of the time. They're very stealthy. They can show up anywhere at any time, and especially little bays and inlets, Hammersley, little out-of-the-way places where they can corner seals and porpoise and whatnot.
They're related
To residents?
to each other?
Oh yeah, yeah. But they run around in like that group was from Southeast Alaska. Some of them are from California. And every time you see them, it's a different configuration. They're not as cohesive as a residential group. You see different configurations, and each time you see them, you never know what you're going to see. And they're a rougher bunch. They tend to have a lot of scratches on them. You can see the scratches outlined on this one. Again, scratches and a real sharp, pointy fin. And on the flukes, little notches, little bite marks out of the tail. I tell you, they're a rough bunch.
Is that like whale body modification?
Yeah. That's pretty cool. That's the underside of a orcas fluke. So you can see it's kind of folded on the side. Generally, they're kind of folded, and then the downstroke. The downstroke of the flukes is the power stroke, and when they push down on their flukes, the tail spreads out. Otherwise, they got kind of a curve to it. These guys are in the middle of a seal kill, and over off Dolphin Point, off Vashon. And it isn't that I was getting close to them. We were just drifting, and it was almost as if they were showing off their kill. Unfortunately, I don't have a picture of their kill, but they were coming right up to the boat on occasion, and just very exuberant, and carrying on with a lot of celebration. And they skin the seal and strip the fat off of it, and then eat the meat parts.
It's amazing how to do it. I don't know.
They're very, I wouldn't say, I guess they're nimble, you could say, with their teeth. And the fact that they don't have hands to hold it like an ear of corn, like we do, they can, and even with salmon, they lop the head off, they eviscerate them, they take the guts out, and then they break them in nice pieces and share them with their pod mates. Yeah, and the other, just before Christmas, I recovered a liver. it was in with some scales, netted the liver, so they don't even eat the liver. You'd think they eat the liver, but. Anyway, just some pretty shots. I think this is the end of my program, and I don't have a stunning ending here like
Besides that, you mean?
some of our others, but I do think it's really neat that we have these animals running around in our backyard or front yard. And hope we can keep them healthy.
No, if there are only a couple prominent bulls, how do they maintain any integrity in their genetic makeup between the three pods?
Well, that's a good question. Lots of females. Actually, there's not lots of females. There's only a given number of breeding females. Some of them are too old. But the genetics thing, I don't know a lot about. I don't pretend to be an expert. My expertise is in the field, and I mean, I dance around the edges of that stuff, but the real experts are in the lab.
The other thing to remember is that this is a stressed population. They were listed as endangered in 2005. This population was also harvested heavily for the captures in the 60s and 70s. So what is being observed in terms of mating behaviors in this pod might be very specific to the stresses that they're under. So it might be that they're doing more interbreeding. I should also clarify also that they mate within the pod, so J1 mated with some of his kin, but never his his daughters. So that is one of the interesting findings. It's closer than they thought, but never directly.
Right.
Do these renegade workers go after swimmers in? No,
One of the things, back to transients, I'm sorry.
or trannies.
No, but, you know, I wouldn't get in the water with them around. Personally, from what I've seen, this whole thing about this new thing where the harbor porpoise are moving in, along with that, we've seen a tremendous increase in transients. We used to go 2-3 years without seeing them. They just didn't come into Puget Sound. Now that the harbor, I'm going on a limb by saying it because it's completely unscientific, but knowing that harbor porpoise are one of their very favorite preys, you know, they're like all the time. It's a revolving door. It's different groups coming in and different groups working the same areas. If it was the same group coming in, I'd say, oh, we got this one group that's learned something about this area. But it's a whole group. So I think the fact that the harbor porpoise, for whatever reason, is increasing, and that the transient activity in Puget Sound is increasing.
They're not attracting sea lions.
They can kill a sea lion, but generally they like smaller things that are easier. Harbor seals. I've seen them harass sea lions. I've never seen them kill one, but I've seen them kill harbor seals and harbor porpoise.
Is there a pecking order in between you talked about some of the older, like J1 passing away and some of the older females. Is there a direct line where, I'm not quite sure, but does a daughter then take the matriarchal role in some of these pods that you have here in the Sound?
Well, the daughter only becomes a matriarch if she's a mother.
Right, but that's what I mean. So is there a pecking order? In other words, or could some other mother that's not as old?
Well, I don't think we know that much about their social order, really.
Speaking as the matriarch.
Yeah.
I mean, what is fascinating is that it is a matriarchal society, but no one really knows how that happens. But presumably the oldest daughters then become the matriarchs, and that seems to be what happens as they die, as the older females disappear, then the next females. But that just means that we see them still associated together. These orcas stay in their families their whole life long. And when a mother dies and leaves a son, that son sometimes will go associate with another pod. There's an L pod whale who hangs out with J pod since his mother died. So they seem to be a bit at loose ends when their mother dies. But there are lots of theories about it's the matriarch who's saying, everybody turn around now, or everybody rest now, or everybody do this, but I don't really, it's pure speculation.
Yeah.
Nobody knows, yeah.
That's true.
How big was that gray on that died of starvation in tons?
Oh boy, you know, I couldn't tell you. After towing it, it was pretty heavy. But what's really neat is you can see the skeleton down at the
Mast Center down at
Mast Center.
Redondo, yeah. They
it's
put
very
it in.
cool that they did that.
She was about 40 feet long, I think.
Yeah, it was an adult.
Yeah.
It was an adult.
Well, is that the place down in Redondo,
Yeah.
out over the water?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you call that, the mast?
Yeah.
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 Mass Environmental
It's
Center.
a Highland College
Yeah.
Marine Center, I guess.
And just a side note on that gray whale, I'm just jumping in like crazy here, Mark, but that whale was kind of a wake-up call for everyone. We hosted, our first talk, the Whale Trail hosted with John Calamakitis, who did the necropsy of that whale. And he was stunned at the amount of debris he found in the whale's stomach. Sweatpants, golf balls, everything that Laura was describing that ends up in the water through stormwater, if that whale had inhaled, their bottom feeders, and he had just, and the sobering and sad thing was it was all recent. It was all from West Seattle.
That garbage patch that I talk about, that I describe, it's right in the whale feeding area. They come in, and I've actually seen whales underwater feeding out in the straits. I didn't see the ones that were going right by Alki Point last year, but some other divers saw them. But they come in 15 to 20 feet of water, and they scoop up the sand, and then they filter out all the little amphipods and things, and that's what they're eating. They're not going out and catching fish and stuff. And so as I understand it, we're impacting our environment so much that maybe the bottom sediment isn't healthy enough.
It's an interesting story, and I wish
Yeah.
actually someone would study the gray, because what the gray whales eat are ghost shrimp.
Yeah.
Maybe this was on their historical map.
Right.
And maybe there were healthy ghost shrimp populations here for them, and they're still navigating down here looking for
And
them.
that's a question I asked too. That's the exact question I asked, because I see the pollution coming out and it settles on everything.
Buzz, do you know any, Buzz Shaw, we're really lucky to have with us another marine mammal expert here. I am putting you right on the spot. Can you add anything to the gray whale ghost shrimp picture?
On the ghost shrimp, it was a number of years ago, I think it was probably close to 20 years ago, that we had quite a few gray whales come in the spring. I think 30 or more gray whales were in the sound at one time. I don't know the exact number. And Everett area and Saratoga Passage area and Port Susan area were favorite feeding grounds. And Lori Whitecamp, I believe is her name, she was actually a graduate student that was studying the impact that commercial ghost shrimp harvesters were having on the population of ghost shrimp, which are harvested for bait. And she noticed when she was in that Everett area, just north of the river there, that she saw these deep pits on the beach. And these deep pits on the beach, after the tide had gone out, was what you see usually after the ghost shrimp harvesters, the commercial harvesters, have been there vacuuming them out. But they weren't supposed to be there at this particular time, so she went to them and asked them if they'd been harvesting, since they weren't due to be harvesting there, and they said no. And she then knew there were gray whales off there. She put two and two together and realized that it was the gray whales that were leaving the pits on the beach from sucking up the ghost shrimp. And then she switched her study to studying gray whales eating ghost shrimp instead of commercial harvesters doing it. And somebody that goes back and reads that research may say, no, that's wrong, you know. But she said, I believe in her research, that there's so many ghost shrimp in that particular area that a gray whale could get all of its nutritional needs for a single day in something like 16 minutes of continuous feeding. There's that many ghost shrimp in that area. So as far as I know, that's still true. I don't know if there's been any great change in the ghost shrimp population there. And there are gray whales that come back to the Everett area, you know, every year in Saratoga Passage, and they're more commonly seen there than anywhere else. When I was at the Seattle Aquarium, I know that there were people that were actually doing gray whale watching trips out of Everett in the spring because the gray whales were so common. And that was one of the places that I took my wife Gretchen on her first kayaking trip. Because if you go to the Snohomish Delta, it's a very, very shallow gradient, not a good place to tow gray whales out. Very, very shallow gradient, and then all of a sudden it drops off to like about 200 feet, about a mile out from the beach. And what the gray whales were doing is they were hanging out at the drop-off until the tide came in, and then they followed the tide in to where the ghost shrimp were. And really, I mean, you said 10 feet of water. I've seen them in 8 feet of water feeding. They'll roll over on their side and they'll suck up the bottom sediments and get the ghost shrimp out. And their tail, half their tail is sticking out of the water, and their pectoral flipper is sticking out of the water because there's no place else they can be when they're on their side. So they're in there, and so when we went up there, I said, we just go up 2 hours before high tide, and we just sit there and wait for them to come in. And they did.
Kayak and gray whales.
The problem with gray whales in a kayak is that I do believe that orchids know where you are. Good echolocation. They should know where you are. Gray whales, I don't think have a clue. They're liable to surface right underneath your kayak and throw you out of the boat or something like that. And there have been at least 2 people killed, not in Puget Sound, but in kayaks by gray whales that have simply trashed their kayaks, maybe inadvertently, or a tail slap on it. I know one guy died of a heart attack after he got that was in Mexico. So gray whales, being around gray whales in a small boat is kind of spooky. Do you find that?
I completely agree. Absolutely.
Never know where they're going to come up. But they're definitely ghost shrimp eaters here. In the Arctic, they're eating amphipods, large burrowing amphipods. That's pretty much all of their diet in the Arctic in the summertime.
One other gray whale digression is that genetics have recently shown that the population that comes into the Strait of Juan de Fuca and around Whidbey Island is genetically distinct from the population that migrates up the coast. So for thousands of years, there's been a separate group that's resident to Washington State and lower Vancouver Island and making inroads into here, which is really interesting, I think.
And some of the whales that come back to Everett are the same whales every year.
So if we have 3 pods living here, can we see them year-round?
Generally not here. Generally they come in here for chum salmon. Like our season is mid-October to first of the year, end of December, which is chum salmon season. And most of the samples we're getting here are chums. Although we have got Chinook salmon samples, even though there's jillions of Chinook or jillions of chums, they will still take a Chinook over a chum. They really prefer. I always say you can call these guys salmon orcas, but specifically they are Chinook salmon orcas. Since the retreat of the last ice age, that's why they're here. The Chinook are the biggest, they're the fattest, they have the most lipids, they have the most nutrition. It's probably why they have those white markings. It probably spooks the fish. And the fish runs right up, trying to get away from it, hits the surface. Well, it makes all the sense in the world because at the surface, the whale's got them cornered. There's light and there's air. You know, it makes sense. And then they cat and mouse them for a while. They chase them around. Depends on how hungry they are. Sometimes they chase them for 5 minutes or more, and then they do the deed. And so they always just eat them right at the surface. That's why we're able to scoop the samples up. Yeah. So it's interesting, and like I say, they lop the heads and take the guts out and break them into pieces.
Who do you get the samples to, Mark?
NOAA Fisheries, the Northwest Fisheries Science Center there, they have a lab. The scale guy's from the state of Washington. He's a state fisheries guy. He can look at a scale and tell you what it is sometimes without the glass even. I've never met him, but from what I understand, he's really good.
This young man.
Yes, sir. King salmon. Yep. Yep.
I wonder if they prefer red or white.
I don't think it matters.
Have you ever seen or heard of any kind of close encounters between the transients and the southern residents? Or do they just keep their distance?
They generally just ignore each other. It's kind of funny. I've heard some stories of, I don't know if they're documented or not, of some interaction with them, but it's very rare. The genetics people say they've been genetically separate for
Thousands.
thousands of years. They're completely different animals. Yeah.
Would you say something about the offshore?
I really didn't.
Would you? I said, would you?
Oh, would I? Yes. I've talked about two kinds of killer whales tonight, the residents, the salmon eaters, and the transients, the meat eaters. There's a third kind. They're called offshores.
Yeah, offshores. They live
And they live in the ocean.
Yeah.
What was it, 1991 or something, after all these years of study, all of a sudden 100 whales show up off Victoria and everybody goes, well, who are these guys? And they don't come inland. I think they come in the straits twice. And they're much more like residents. And it's thought...
No, but I think it's true that that group that was in Dyes Inlet had a higher mortality rate than all the rest
Way
of
higher.
the southern residents.
Way
It's one
higher.
of the reasons they were counted as endangered, because they started not reproducing fast enough to keep up with the death rate, and that group lost a lot of whales after that visit to Dyes Inlet. That's over the next couple of years.
Well, I noticed, because I've been following that the K-pod's been out on the coast and and going south, but they're back or whatever. Is that unusual for them to leave the Salish Sea?
They've seen K's and L's down as far as Monterey quite a few times at this time of year, because there's really no salmon around here for them to eat right now. And the continental shelf has salmon runs of all different kinds running around out there. The only reason we know that is they put a satellite tag on them the day they left here, and they went right out around to the ocean and down to San Francisco, and then they turned around and came back up. I haven't heard anything lately.
They came into the strait and then turned around and went back out.
Did they?
Yeah.
I'll be darned.
Yeah.
So they made a trip to San Francisco and back in the last 3 weeks. Yeah,
Yeah.
Why would they do that?
looking for food. Everything they do is about food. I just rule of thumb, there's all different size animals in a pod. Bigger ones eat more, the little ones eat less, but I always use the rule of thumb, 100 pounds a day. So if you got 20 animals, there's a ton of fish right there. Every day, every day, every day.
Mark, do you want to talk a little bit about how that's changed since you were growing up? I know you said some surprising things about when you saw the whales here as a kid.
As far as time of the year?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, we used to see them in the summer regularly. Matter of fact, one of my earliest memories, I was probably 5 years old, and they went right by the point, and all the lifeguards that weren't on duty went out and started throwing rocks at them. I was throwing rocks at them too, I didn't know any better. Of course, in those days, they were the big bad wolf, we didn't, it wasn't, I grew up down there, and all of us had rowboats down by the ferry dock there, and I remember one of the mothers, when those whales come by, you boys come in now. You don't be out there when those whales are out there. But yeah, they used to come by in the summer a lot, and for the Chinook, when the kings come through in late July, early August, we used to see them. even into the 70s, I saw them, I think, 3 times on Seafair Sunday. It was
Oh,
almost like they knew everybody was over at the lake. So take a run through through Puget Sound, and everybody's over there. Seafair Sunday, which is the first Sunday in August. But it was a regular routine. They'd come, there were super pods too, the whole bunch of them, all the pods together, taking a run through Puget Sound. So that's one of the things we've seen shift is the lack of year-round. It's almost strictly fall now for southern residents. Transients all year round.
I have a quick question. I was watching some stuff from, I think, Longhouse Media on it's got a bunch of tribal stories, like historical stories, and they're talking about how their relationship with the orcas were killer whales, and it was talking about how they had this is like from thousands of years ago, passed on through generations, seal problems. They had either harbor seal, it's not quite clear, seals eating the salmon, and the people were starving. And then they called out to their orca gods, and the orcas came in and took out the seals. But from what you've described, that would be a transient batch.
Yep, yeah.
So that's 1,000 years ago, so you probably had residents and transients then as well. And it'd kind of be neat is there any research being done looking at the Indian, the tribal history on the orcas too? Because they've got stories that they've passed on.
I'm sure somebody's doing that. I'm not
Kinda
familiar
neat.
with that myself. Other than what they found in middens and stuff as far as physical evidence.
But not the lore, the folklore type stuff. That'd be kind of neat to
that's doing that.
kind of look at.
So when you talk about, I know that they use the Chinook mostly and then the chum, and do they just ignore the other runs, or do they bring them to surface and then realize it's not, or do they know before they?
Oh, I think they know.
They know before they
I'm
even-
pretty sure about that, yeah.
Just from the echolocation and
They
size
can-
and whatever they get.
They can probably see they can. They know.
They know what's what
They're
before
pretty
they-
wise animals, yeah. Yes,
Yeah,
sir.
about 10 years ago on NPR, they had a story about killer whale orca. And they said that some of them, this was like around 2000, that had been alive since World War I. How do you determine the age of an orca?
Well, you can't. Unless you have a photograph of that same animal from World War I.
Yeah, from 1918.
Because the study of them, I mean, they did go back and
There's no physiological way to tell.
can't do it, I don't think. I mean, maybe rings on a tooth or something, but
Yeah. Get them to cooperate.
yeah,
Just one tooth.
yeah. You got enough of them there. That's part of the deal with J2. Like I say, even back in late 70s, they were saying, oh, she's in her 80s, well, that's just some kind of an extrapolation. At that point, she'd be 100 and something now, but 120. So, yeah, certainly for these animals, the study hasn't been going on long enough, because 74 is when the Canadians started looking at it. We started looking at it in 76.
So we'll have one or two more questions, and then I hope that you'll take some time to come and visit the seal sitters and Judy's booth in here and our whale trail booth at the back. And we had a lot of celebrations last year to celebrate Springer's 10th anniversary of going home. Actually, and then I'm just going to jump right in. This is a picture of Springer in 2011 that was taken in Canada. So if you can remember Mark's pictures of that poor little whale. That's what she looks like now. And I also wanted to mention that the whale trail is Springer's legacy. The group that formed the whale trail came together to get the little whale home. I was part of a group of nonprofits who formed a group called the Orphan Orca Fund. Most nonprofits in the area worked together to fundraise. We became the community's arm into the project. And first time it's ever happened, and it's the only successful orca reunion in history. And last year we had a 5-year reunion, and Springer showed up, and then we had It was kind of astonishing, actually. We had the whole project team on a boat, and 5 years to the hour, we were in front of the bay she was released from. The timing of the whales is spooky. Really, really cool. Anyway, so I just wanted to kind of round out the Springer story. And we've got some merchandise left over from our summer events about Springer, so if you want to have a little piece of that story, please join in.
Joe just posted that video, it was awesome.